Welcome to another episode of the Vikingology podcast. I'm co-host number one, CJ Adrian.
And I'm co-host number two, Terry Barnes, and we are the art and science of the Viking Age. And today we're going to have both art and science, totally, craft and skill, art and craft, all of that. But first, I will apologize for my voice because I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm super excited for today because it's been like a year and a half in the making. And it's our 50th episode. CJ, happy whatever is that? Golden anniversary? Silver
Wait,
anniversary?
this is number 50?
Yes.
Wow.
I saved Eric for the special number episode.
Number 50.
So, yeah. But today we have Eric Knudsen, who is, as people who have been watching our podcast and or listening to our podcast will know, we've posted a couple of times about the lovely Viking ship that has been built in Washington State, which is, well, used to be close to us, but now that you have moved to France, it's only close to me. But anyways, we haven't talked really that much about Viking ships on this podcast, and we've been doing it for 3 years almost now. So that seems kind of strange to me since it's an iconic thing when people think of Vikings.
Yeah,
So
it was sort of their thing, right? I mean, that's even one of the foundational propositions from our friend Ben, who mentioned that, maybe one of the reasons the Viking Age happened at all is because they had a ship, right? They invented the ship, they put down a keel, they put up these sails, they said, okay, what do we do now? Well, let's go to France and raid. It's like a
yeah,
kid with
exactly.
it's like a kid. I think I wrote that in a blog one time. It's like a kid with a BB gun. Of course he's going to shoot a bird.
Of course, he's going to shoot his eye out. Right? That's like, wow. So welcome, Eric. And I love your background because it smacks of Pacific Northwest.
Thank you. Good morning, Terry. Good morning, CJ. Bonjour. Bonjour. Yeah, I'm really very excited to be out here in the Pacific Northwest, and I've been out here for a few years full time now, but I'm digging it and learning so much as I go. Anyway, thanks for having me on here. It has
Yeah.
been a little while, kind of lead up to this story and that, so really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. So just to give our audience a little bit of background, I think I first was made aware of your project by Sean at what is it like Northwest Sales or something?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Building the sales.
On
And
Rankin, right?
yeah, yeah, and it was a total fluke of like I saw it just on local TV news, a story about other people who were building ships up there somewhere, but they were focused on like more like the galleon or the like 17th or 18th century ships. But I
Mhm.
thought maybe they would, have something, Viking ship wise. And so I contacted them and they're like, no, you should hear about this other project. You should talk to Sean. So then I reached out to him and then he put me in touch with your dad. And then also Preben Pedersen, who's the, I think, executive director of the Northwest Danish Association, which is up there. And I'm actually going to be speaking at their annual event again here in a couple of weeks. But they have had a crew of their members come and visit the ship, I think, a couple of times.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of Scandinavians or what are they call Scandinavians up here in the Pacific Northwest who have been like really interested in this project. But yeah, so I've been emailing like with your dad and then with you
Mhm.
about this. And so, yeah, I think maybe the best thing to do, and some of our audience will know, but still, for those who don't, like tell the great story about how this thing even came to be.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So, well, I'll set a little context for it. Uh, Back in the early 70s, my family we ran it and we operated a wilderness canoe tripping program up in northern Ontario, and it was called Langskib, which is the Danish word for long ship. So it was all kind of about the Vikings, even early on. And my father was a school teacher. He taught middle school biology, so he had his summers off. And then I think it was an ad in a newspaper, camp for sale, wilderness camp for sale. So he and a partner of his from another teacher from school, they trucked on up to Northern Ontario, saw this kind of really rugged wilderness base camp up there, kind of off the grid, well up on the lake. And we started this canoe tripping camp, and it was for boys. And over many, many years, from very humble beginnings, it started out, and we had many more people over the years. But all along, it was always kind of about the theme was always kind of about the Vikings and like that. And so, fast forward 40 some years later, we sold the business, and, it was kind of like, wow, maybe we should get around to building that Viking ship after all. We've been talking about it for all these long years. And so, um, earlier on, my father had, he had made a promise to his dad, to my grandfather, Heinrich. My father's is David. And my grandfather had, he had contracted a Parkinson's in his 50s, and it was kind of it was degenerative, and kind of, at some point my father went down to go visit, and made this crazy promise to him that he wanted to honor him by building a Viking ship for him, you know. And really, the long and short of it is he was just, making good on his word after all these years to get this thing completed. So so that's a big part of it. And then for my part of it, coming up as from a 5-year-old at this canoe tripping camp in Canada, doing all these trips every summer. At 9 years old, I was, I just kind of had this like spirit of the chest moment after coming back from one of these canoe trips that, I wanted to I vowed I would someday sail on a Viking ship on the sea. And then I was there with my best friend, and we were both into it. Like, yeah, we're gonna be Vikings. And now, many, many years later now, here we are, kind of, that circle has closed. And so that's, that those are two, aspects of the origin of this Viking ship project. And, I can tell you a little bit more about, if you want to hear about, how that came into the Pacific Northwest, and why we chose Anacortes and doing this out here. We had, my father had started this project with a fellow in Port Townsend, Jeff Briggs, and they had, Jeff had brought inner city kids from Chicago up to do these canoe trips in Canada, and they'd get up into the woods, and they'd never been around a forest like that, or lakes like that, so it was kind of a big deal for them. But it was very successful. Overall, these kids came back, and they had very positive experience, even though they were wildly out of their element. So we thought, this is pretty cool. We could do, we could kind of get into having, youth programs, doing expeditions on a Viking ship. How cool would that be? To have, get them in, literally in the same boat together, dealing with issues, and solving problems together, and learning along the way all about sailing, and learning about, kind of how a group of people can work together, that kind of thing. So that was really kind of a part of it. The theme of it was getting people out, getting young people out in the boat. And it's kind of a long story to it, but at some point, things kind of changed, and we needed to go a different direction. And I was invited to come on board at some point, and was able to put some sweat equity into the construction of the boat, and then along the lines, developing the business side of it as well. And so we were fortunate to locate the shipwright out here, Jay Smith, in Anacortes. He runs a shop called Espoya Boat, and Jay has been, he's been amazing to work with. Really, he's very well, very learned in the ways of building these Viking boats. He had an opportunity when he was young in college to go study in Denmark as a starter, and then he had a grant to go do that. And then later he went back to his kind of ancestral homeland area in Norway, and had an apprenticeship with a boat builder there who was doing lap straight construction vessels, and then another one in the Faroe Islands as well, another apprenticeship. So he came back from all of that, very well equipped to open his shop Espoya in Anacortes, and started making a lot of smaller Viking boats. Valkyrie is his largest project, but we were so fortunate to find him out here in Anacortes, and when we got out here, it was like, this is the place for a Viking boat. Puget Sound and the Salish Sea and the Inside Passage, like, really couldn't have chosen a better place. So that was really the origin of it.
So then Jay's experience, did that play into, because I know that this is a replica of, is it one of the Skulldelev boats in Roskilde in the ship museum there in Denmark? So is his experience with that? Is that what influenced
Oh,
you to sort of model after that boat? Because a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
people
sure.
have modeled after like the Gokstad boat, which is in the the Oslo Museum.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. So that, that was picked out as kind of a, the Skotolev 6 is kind of like a general purpose vessel, really, I mean, historically, it was, it was a fishing vessel, and then they added another strake onto it, and it became kind of a coastal trader. And so what we did was took basically the same lines as Skotolev 6, but scaled it up to a 56-foot version. There are a couple of additional strakes and a couple of other number of other things that we had to, we had to modify to satisfy the Coast Guard and to make it safe and kind of up to date, modern standards, that kind of thing. But essentially, yeah, that was the idea.
Okay. Well, so go, should we show some pictures here? Just CJ, do you think, or
Yeah, let's do it. And while
okay.
you're pulling that up, so I have a really important question.
Yeah.
How much did this thing cost you in the long run? And if it was more than $150,000, how come you didn't just buy one from the Roskilde Museum, which will build one for you for that much?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it, I'm all in on this thing, and it's been, in time and money and savings and all that. I mean, I think I'm not exactly sure, I don't keep track of every dollar on it, but we're in there, probably close to $1 million for this thing. And yeah,
Really? Wow.
yeah, yeah, like you can get this done a lot, a lot more economically at Roskilde. They will build them for you. Um, but there are a couple of things. One is, we wanted to build it ourselves because there's the destination, which is having this amazing Viking ship built. But really, and it's trite to say, but but it's the journey too, is the thing, the destination gives you the journey, and the journey's been amazing, and continues to be that way. So building our own was a big part of this because it's brought together so many people, talented people, and community, a lot of people from the community, volunteers. So in that regard, it's been really, really wonderful. And then, of course, also, we had to, kind of fit everything in and work with the Coast Guard to make everything up to their standard. So in the United States, you can't take passengers on a foreign built vessel, unless you have some super duper permissions for that. But you have to have a vessel that's actually made in America, which Valkyrie is.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and just for our listeners' benefit, when I bring that up, the $150,000 model is like it's a replica of the Gogstad, but it's really small. It's for like 6 people, and
Yeah.
this ship is much, much bigger.
Yeah, this is 56 foot, and it's pretty beamy, and we've been granted permission to by the Coast Guard to carry 30 passengers and 5 crew. So it's quite a sizable thing. The builder Jay Smith, he says in the Viking ship world there's Papa bears, Mama bears, and baby bears, and he calls this one a Mama bear.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play this, and for all of you out there who are just listening, you need to get to your desktop or your laptop and go onto our Substack and watch the video because the visuals of this are amazing. And so this is a short video clip, very short, just a few seconds that I think I got originally from your dad. And then I'm going to show just a few little, I don't know, I have like 4 or 5 maybe of I think some of them maybe came from you of still photos, but some of them maybe from my student Noah. And so yeah, thank you again so much. Just for all you all out there, like shout out to Noah. My students, as maybe some in our audience have probably heard me say before, do this collaborative project, and we write a book about the Viking Age, and each student picks a topic that they want to research and write their chapter about. And Noah was on to something else, like something having to do with Viking themed video games or something. And then when I talked about Valkyrie in the class, he was like, wait, what? Because he lived in Squim, which is just not very far down the road. And so he's like, I think I'm going to do it on the Valkyrie. What do you think about that? And I'm like, that would be a really cool idea because you would get to see it maybe in person. I'll contact Eric. And Eric, you were so lovely and gracious to actually meet with
My
my
pleasure.
student. It was just, he was so excited about this. And so anyway, so some of the pictures will be of his, but here, I'm going to just play this real quick.
Is this
Yeah.
meant to have sound?
Yeah. Does it not?
There's no sound on my end.
Oops, sorry.
I can make some for you. Da-la-na,
Make
na, na,
them
na,
for me.
na.
Wait, all right, let me all right, why is that thing popping up? I need to anyway. All right. But yeah, so you get a sense of it there anyway in the water. And then so here, so this is where.
So this is at the Skyline Marina in Anacortes, and we had it laid up there over the winter, up on the hard. And I've kind of, looking into it, it was important. It's a wooden boat, so it kind of breathes and continues to grow, and not grow, but move and kind of move and groove, with the different conditions. So we wanted to have it, humid enough, like not dried out in a building over the winter. So we kind of shrink wrap it over the top. We have a whole setup inside. We can do work on the winter. We've got a heater, dehumidifier, lighting, everything we need to kind of stay busy, in the winter months, just kind of, keeping things ship shape.
Ship shape. There you
Yep.
go.
And then in the spring, we pull everything off and put a new coat of bottom paint on and kind of oil everything up. The wood is really thirsty, needs a lot of TLC. We put the head and tail, the carvings on. We rig everything up. The mast goes back up. That all happens in the spring.
And then
What kind of
oh, go ahead, CJ.
what kind of wood did you guys use?
That's what I
Yeah.
was just yeah.
Yeah, so we were really, really fortunate to get just some of really the best materials you can find. And what we're looking at here, the hull, all the planking is made from Alaskan yellow cedar that was found up in British Columbia. And these planks that you see, they're maybe 10 inches wide, but they start off maybe 24 inches wide because we carved them to that shape. So, something that starts out wide and it kind of gets nibbled down, and then they're steam bent to, especially up around the ends to kind of fit up there and get that, that crazy shape up like that. And so when we were looking at these planks, we were counting 60 tree rings to the inch. So when you extrapolate over, the 24 or so inches, we know that the trees were at least 800 years old and could have actually been around at the time of the Vikings, could be 1,000 years old. So that kind of give us shivers, to think about that, and kind of it's just a really cool thing. And then all of the framing, like along the shear there, along the railing, and all the internal framing is made of white oak that we found down in Oregon. And where that was located, we had a climber up in the tree, and Jay Smith was down there, and a couple other people. They'd taking patterns, and up in the tree, kind of Jay was selecting each individual part that he was going to use in the boat later. He kind of had had it up here, a catalog of what the pieces were, and what they were looking for the framing were, they're called they're crooks is what they're called, and they're groans. You'd have like the trunk of the tree and a branch, or the trunk and a root, so it had like a curve to it, so that the fibers are just continuous through it and very strong. So when we cut them and shape them and put them in the boat, they're at their very strongest, as opposed to something that is kind of cut and joined together. So the framing is white oak, and then you can't really see much of the Douglas fir. The mast is made out of Douglas fir, and all the deck planks are as well. And then we have some sea chests and a couple of other things that are all made out of Douglas fir. And that was all from up in what we call up the river, up in Skagit County, up in Anacortes. And a number of people up there that had access to some beautiful old virgin timber that had been cut kind of close to the turn of the century, and had just been laying on the forest floor for decades and decades, and kind of propped up on rocks. Nobody kind of knew the origin of it or how it came to be, but we were able to procure that, and it's just really the best stuff you could find. So we've been very fortunate, and it's all coming from the Pacific Northwest.
Let's see. I think I have some picture of well, that's just the dragon head, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's this was commissioned from an artist up in Bellingham, Scott Jensen, and he's he's of Danish background as well. And Scott is he's a renowned artist in the area, I've been up to his studio, and he just has amazing things up there. He was works with the Tlingit tribe, and does some poles and that kind of thing, and very talented artist. What we were going for here was kind of something that was a Viking motif, but also indigenous Pacific Northwest. Kind of a blend of that, and I think he did a great job of capturing that.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I think, I've probably mentioned it before on our podcast at some point in the past, but I've looked into kind of this cross-cultural comparison of, well, the Chinook tribe in particular, with the Vikings, because this tribal level societies, with chieftains and raiding and potlatches, or what would be the mead hall kind of, the longhouse, big feasts, and all of there's just so many elements to both of these cultures that are very, very similar. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that is true. It is pretty interesting.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there you go with some of the deck boards and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so you see the footprints I'm looking at along in the dew there on the port side of the boat. You can see that's all the Douglas fir planking, and the planks here, they're not fastened down. They all kind of float free. You can lift them all up. So we store equipment down below, and different supplies and that kind of thing, and of course all of our bilge pumps and plumbing and electrical, all that kind of stuff is down there as well. But yeah, some of these planks are just about 2 inches thick, so it's really very
Wow.
solidly built. The framing on this, we have more framing than the Vikings would have used. So, this is really an interpretation of Skaldaleb 6 more than I'd say a true replica. In working with the Coast Guard, we needed to have a lot of additional framing in the bottom. So the boat is stiffer than it would normally be as a Viking ship was 1,000 years ago. But it also, all that extra weight down below kind of acts essentially as some ballast as well. So whereas the Vikings would have used rocks, we've got additional oak and a bunch of batteries, and some metal down there. And then also here you can see the oars. These are also Douglas fir. They're just about 18 foot long. We have 16 oars on board, and that's pretty neat to operate. We can row this with and have many times now with like just 4 people. And it goes along slowly, but it does go. You can turn it, everything you want to do, even with 4 people.
What's the top speed you've gotten to?
We've had it up to about, I'd say about 6 knots. We haven't had much wind to sail it in yet. We haven't had any like big wind, so it's been pretty slow. We're keen to get out there, with a good blow, and see what we can do. But in terms of the sea conditions, we have had it out in 4 foot, 5 foot, and even a few 6 foot waves, and it's really kind of like a big canoe is how it handles. And it was familiar to me. I've spent most of my life, in the summers, on canoe trips up in Canada. So it kind of felt very, very familiar, very at ease with the way, the whole thing kind of moved on the water. And so that was a real relief, that it was, it could handle that with ease. And it kind of, it's kind of, when you're actually on a boat like this, you really start to imagine like, wow, people were really out in the open ocean in this small boat, and with no safety net like we have. We have a couple of electric motors in here as well, and but to think of the bravery that people had to go out and in those great distances, into the unknown, kind of it's inspiring, but it's kind of I don't know what the word is, but it's kind of daunting.
Yeah. I was like, my students were like, well, there's no below deck, like nowhere to go get out of the weather. I'm like, nope, no. And then for me, it's like, you're on there with, 60 or 70 of your closest friends. And the first thought I always have is like, all right, everybody turn around. I have to go to the bathroom.
That's right. I know. Yeah. So pretty rugged. We have, I mean, just to touch on that for a second, up in the foredeck, we've got this really cool little, toilet situation up there. So it's all kind of put away to look, so we try to hide everything so it still looks like a Viking ship, But if nature calls, we can swing into action and have a privacy kind of screen. It's all form fitted to the hull, and it's just a push button, and no muss, no fuss. It's a pretty
Yeah, like
groovy.
is it a composting toilet or something?
It's even better. I mean, it's this thing. There used to be this thing when I was a young father called the diaper genie, and you put the diapers in the chimney, and you push a button, and it spins it all up like a sausage. And that's what this is. I mean, it's basically the same thing. So it's a clean scene.
That's funny.
These are all
Yeah.
things I thought of for my books, and I had to do a lot of research on,
Yeah.
the boats, what they had. One of the things to get out of the weather that I found, and I don't know how commonly it would have been used, but I just used it because in my mind I was like, I'm writing a book from my perspective, so I was like, they have to get out of the weather somehow. So it's
Yeah.
basically tying these tarps that would go up to the mast and then come out in a triangle out, kind of like you see like the little sails that you put in your yard,
Yeah.
sometimes to block the sun, kind of like that. But I mean, that's still not a lot. If you're in rainy weather, it's not gonna it's not gonna stop much.
Yeah. I think, yeah, for sure they would have had some kind of like canopy or tarp, that they could, bring down, cinch down pretty tightly, because the wind will grab that like a sail too, unless it's kind of really secured. And then I imagine it was just, really good clothing, leather and, walrus leather or whatever they might have been able to get their hands on, that deerskin, that kind of thing. But just tough people, to start. And but also, the other thing that kind of struck us as we were building this is like the genius of people too, and how they evolved these designs. I mean, I think there's kind of a thought that, oh, we're very advanced now, in the way we live, and we're so much smarter, but I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, when we had to contend with some of the problem solving and building this, we kind of marveled at the way that they did it, and we
Yeah.
look at, just in our research, just look at in this picture that you're putting up right now is a great example of that. We're looking at the keelson here, which is it's a tree trunk and a branch. This is solid oak, and this thing is about 22 feet long. It's really enormous. It's all notched out on the bottom so that it fits like a puzzle piece on top of all those floor timbers. And then that upright part, the branch part, it gets trimmed down to something that's really just about 4 inches wide. It's all you see on the deck level of that whole thing. So you don't see any of this, from the deck level except this little 4 inch block. But that's providing all that additional strength and to the support the mast. The mast kind of, you don't see it in this picture, but there's a mortise there behind that branch where the mast steps down into, when we had that all trimmed out. So it's very strong, but also kind of beautiful, this elegant, form. And I'd say that's, if you throughout the whole boat, that's what you see, kind of this like economy of materials, and the size of it is kind of just right, not overbuilt, not underbuilt. The form of it is perfectly adapted to what their needs were, you know. And here again, I mentioned the additional floor timbers. There's a lot of oak on the bottom of this, and this would have been more than Vikings would have had, in terms of that framing.
So looking at the wood is making me remember the story that you told me about the malming process. Can you explain a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So malming, MALM. This is we learned about what the Vikings were doing with the mast, and they'd select a tree that they wanted for a mast. They'd send somebody up to climb and cut the top of it off. And what would happen is, they'd leave the trees rooted in the ground for 2 winters after it had been cut at the top, and all the sap would kind of course through the xylem and up and down through the tree, kind of you know coursing all through the tree. So it provided a lot of extra strength and bug resistance and that kind of thing. Then they'd harvest the tree, they'd cut it down after 2 years, trim it out, and then the root end, where all those fibers are the densest and strongest, would be put up at the top. So the crown of the mast, the whole thing was inverted 180 degrees. So the root end is up at the top, and the top of the tree was fastened down to the keel. And in addition to that, they would, they take note of which way the tree was growing in relation to the prevailing conditions, because the tree, grows in response to the weather. So they would install it, along this, along the same orientation, so that tree would kind of have the extra strength of almost like a bow, like a bow and arrow. So we were able to do the same thing, and we picked two trees. So, and we had, we did the malming process there. So we have a second one kind of in reserve if we had any issues with the first. We could swing into action with the second a little quicker. So we did that for the yard arm as well. So as much as we could with Valkyrie, we wanted to research and understand these traditions and really try to build these in as well. And they're just they're interesting for people, that to consider that, they 1,000 years ago they were thinking these kind of things to try to maximize the strength of their materials. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. What else?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just a good example there of the clinker built that the Viking Age is, even though it's not unique to the Viking Age, but that they utilize this pretty well, right?
This is what we see here in this picture. These are galvanized iron rivets, and of course, they didn't have those 1,000 years ago. But these rivets were purchased in Norway, and they're very similar to what would have been used historically. It's kind of like a square shaped nail that goes in, and then there's a round, almost like washer shaped rove. They come together, with a hammer and a backing, and you kind of clink, clink, clink them together. And that's the sound it is, clink, clink, clink. And then when you hit that final tap, it kind of has this like resonant quality to it, and you can hear it and kind of feel it. And you know that it's all been sent home. It doesn't require any further tapping. And you kind of, you get a kind of hand for it, and you go down and you put, hundreds of these things in. And then, it really starts to, just kind of take the form. And then also you see, and here are the trunnels, these wooden tree nails, and these are made out of Pacific yew, which is yew wood is that was used for longbows, and it's very flexible, very strong, and it's the perfect thing for a Viking ship, because you want a Viking ship to have a little bit of flex. Really a lot of the strength of the vessels were in their flexibility, and which is kind of a different paradigm from a lot of other kind of shipbuilding. The idea of like bashing into waves is something that wouldn't have worked on a ship like this. It needed to hit the wave and kind of twist and flow over it. And they called some of these dragon ships, and it would have actually the appearance at sea of twisting and flexing through the seaway, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, like strong and supple at the same time.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Oh, and I wanted that one for the oars, or not oars, but the shield. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So the shields, my stepmom Cynthia, she did all the shields, and we had these commissioned. There's a fellow on the East Coast in Georgia who made these for us, and I believe they're made out of a lemon wood, which is like very similar to basswood, which is something that was used, and they're all wrapped in elk hide, and they have a steel boss on them, and they're pretty heavy. I mean, they're hefty. You'd get a good workout just carrying these around. And then all the designs were just kind of a variety of different things, just kind of like, that came to us, and we wanted to put on there. Some are like kind of like represent, the flags of some of the Scandinavian nations, and others are more just kind of more or less traditional Viking or imagined Viking design. So, but the overall effect is kind of colorful and we think kind of cool. We've got 24 of them.
Yeah, the Danish flag right there. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Is that your dad?
I can't even say. I think I can't tell.
Your dad, and looks like the dog.
Yeah, the dog. I think it is. I think that is my father. Yeah.
Yeah.
A cheerful golden retriever. How different might history have been if the Vikings showed up with those on their ships?
I know, right?
Oh, look, a joyful-looking golden retriever. Hello, I'm here to say hi to everybody.
That's what Vikings were, right? The blonde-haired Vikings. They were golden retrievers. They'd come and like retrieve your things from you.
They would retrieve their things from me. That's funny.
Yeah,
I
right.
like these pictures. These
One
pictures.
of the dogs I've been thinking about, there's this dog called the Karelian bear dog, and it's like from Russia or Finland or somewhere around there. And this, I don't know if you've heard of this thing. It kind of looks like an Akita dog. It's, like medium size, but it actually goes out and will keep a bear at bay, if you have if you're close to a situation where there's a big bear, which is kind of
Wow.
neat. So I was thinking if we end up taking Valkyrie up into the inside passage, which we'd very much like to do at some point, there all the bears up there. We might have a dog or two on board to kind of keep keep us a little distance from the bear.
Wow. So
That makes
many.
sense. I mean, a bear could jump over. I mean, that wouldn't be much for a bear to jump over,
No,
right?
no, no.
I mean, if
Yeah,
you're pretty close to shore, I mean, it's not like it's got a much shallower draft, so it wouldn't be much distance.
yeah.
Right.
Yikes. Can you imagine getting like, now what? There's a bear on the boat. What are we supposed to do?
You're giving me a great idea for something I should have put that in a book. They went through all the
Yeah.
all the what's now Russia and everything. I didn't even think of that. Of just like, now there's a bear on the boat. What do we do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, also thinking of like the fantasy trip for this. I mean, total fantasy, but it would be going through the Northwest Passage in reverse, and the idea of like skidding this boat across ice or fending off polar bears or, wintering over, that kind of thing. It's, that's all. I mean, these are things you can imagine, like some of the Vikings might have dealt with similar kind of things,
You could
Yeah.
portage, right? You
Yeah.
could take the Columbia, portage to the Snake,
Hmm.
basically follow the fur. You don't have to go to the North Pole with the bears. You could just go the reverse what the fur traders were doing, right? And so
Yeah,
just
do
you
that.
could portage up from the Snake out into the Yellowstone River and then back down the Missouri. That'd be kind of fun.
Rowing
Portaging might be a pain.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, actually, that brings to mind, like, how much does she weigh if you had to portage and lift her up by hand?
Yeah. So I think, we think it's about just over 20,000 pounds. So actually lighter than you might think, but it is kind of really just like a big canoe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But even with a crew of, say, 30 people, that would still be heavy, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not about to just throw her over your shoulder. And
No,
'cause that's how they describe the portaging, or I've seen it described. The portaging is it was carried over their shoulders, from
yeah.
the different rivers. Like
I
that
don't,
must have been a small boat.
yeah, that was definitely a smaller boat. I think that what I've, kind of learned about this is they would have logs that were, instead of round and like rolling, they would be flat on the top, but like, greased. So the whole, the hull would just, the keel would just slide over the greased, poles,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that would be,
Even still, though, having to prepare for that, right? Like, all right,
yeah.
did we pack the greased poles? Make
Yeah.
sure we got everything we need.
Well, I actually imagined it as there were maintained highways at a certain point. Like somebody would have just figured out, hey, maybe we should like just maintain a road of these greased
Yeah,
poles
probably,
between.
yeah.
And so I had it at least in the Fell Deeds of Fate. They show up and there's a little town there, and then they pull the ships onto land, and there's just a maintained highway of these things, so they can roll all their ships, and then different fleets would come by and pay a toll because it cost money to maintain. And then they arrived in Gnezdovo, which is on the Dnieper River, really far in the north, and then that's where they go back into the water.
Yeah.
So that's what I imagined. There's
would
no
make a
evidence
lot of
for that,
sense.
but
Yeah, like a
I mean,
corduroy highway kind of thing.
yeah, you got to figure one of these guys, these were entrepreneurs in the extreme, right? So one guy must have just thought, what if we just build the roads and we will charge people money? They're bringing
Well, they
silver
will
back
come.
from the east. Yeah.
No, that stands to reason,
So then your entire process, if I remember right, is something along the lines of like 13 years or something. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's been a long time coming, and I'd say there were maybe 5 years or so where the whole project was kind of on ice for a while, not much happening with it, and then we would throw ourselves at it, for a summer or longer, and on and off like that for a period of about 13 years. Yeah.
So your grandfather, to whom the promise was made, he never got to see her completed then?
No, that was all long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully, maybe he's up there in Valhalla somewhere, looking down and see.
He was a winter Texan. So that, where the Southern Vikings go after in the afterlife, they go to Valhalla.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about it in terms of time frame. I mean, obviously, we're in the modern era and you've got all these other things going on, and so you can stop and start and whatever. But I'm wondering if you got, even maybe from Jay, like a sense of like, okay, but if you're living in the Viking Age and, your quote unquote occupation depends on having ships, like how fast, sort of semi mass production, I don't even know, like how
Yeah.
fast do you think you could really knock one of these things out?
Well, I think they would. I think it would be like maybe in a season. I think, but they'd have like 100 people they'd throw at it. Probably they'd have a lot, and they made many of them. They had big fleets of them, and they just and that was they didn't. I think it's many ways it was a simpler time. They didn't have so many other things going on. They could afford the time to invest in the project like that, because that was the main lifeblood of their livelihood was having these vessels. So
Yeah.
I think I don't know for sure, but I think it would be like probably a season or two they could make these boats. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and they also, yeah, I mean, there's unfree people in
yeah,
Scandinavia as
that's
well.
true too.
So
Yeah,
they have, work that they're, getting done by those people, I think.
They didn't have
Also,
distractions, like
yeah,
there's that's big news in France right now. Is they just came out with a study that shows how much productivity is lost to infinite scrolling on
yeah,
social media, and they're like, we're losing. They put a number to it. They said like 3 or 4% of GDP is being lost to
yeah,
doom scrolling, which is pretty incredible. They didn't have that in the Viking Age, so
yeah.
get it done in a season. Now it's like, oh, we'll get it done 3, 4, 5 years because we got a TikTok the whole time, right?
That's right. And I mean that's we're modern Vikings. We're Vikings with Wi-Fi. You know,
oh my God. Well, that's the thing though, right? I mean, your ship is, right? Like you said, I mean, you couldn't do like a faithful, but primarily, right, because you wanted to be able to do this thing where you could actually take people out in it. I mean, if you were just
exactly.
building
Yeah,
an artifact that was just going to sit there and look pretty, it would have been maybe a different bit
yeah,
of a process, but you've got all this other
yeah.
sort of compliance that you have to do with modern Coast Guard and safety and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that was another big kind of part of it for sure, and the Coast Guard has been really great to work with. They've been a part of it since the start, and they have a very rigorous process to ensure that everything is up to scratch. And we've learned together. When we started out, we were all kind of scratching our heads. Well, Viking ship's supposed to flex, and the Coast Guard's the paradigm wasn't the same. They're like, they initially, they wanted to have kind of some steel reinforcement in there. We're like, steel, that's not part of a Viking ship. Come on. But we would work it out together and problem solve together. And one of the coolest things was they would show up almost every time with an entourage of like 10 or 12 people, and they were really interested in learning about, because it's not something they really get to see. So it was pretty cool experience for them too. But yeah,
This
yeah,
is news to me that the Coast Guard's in charge of that kind of regulation. It
yeah.
seems to me it should be some kind of state authority that would, with
Well,
all the different rules and permits and so forth. Like the Coast Guard seems kind of
yeah,
like an odd entity to be in charge of that sort of thing. But I guess
yeah,
safety.
yeah. It's a federal program, and they're the ones who enforce the navigable waters of the United States. So
Mm.
that's so in their bailiwick. hmm And the rule book is thick and always evolving and changing, and it's kind of like the tax code, I imagine. There's so much of it that nobody really understands all of it. you know so but it's you kind of go through stage at a time, and eventually it gets done. So we're very proud of to be in the position of having this complete and be able to take passengers, which is a unique thing in the United States. We're really the only place where a passenger can come on a Viking ship, which is kind of cool.
Wow. Yeah, so we'll post your website, which you've now got fully updated, it looks like there. so that people can, check things
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
And it looks like they can like contact you about making arrangements to go out on the boat
Yeah,
and
yeah, absolutely. We've just kind of been working right now, recently on recruiting and training a crew here in Paulsbo is where we're located. That's the home port for Valkyrie. And we're getting close to completing that. So we should be open, it's the tail end of the season now. We're getting into fall, but we will be offering some harbor cruises in Paulsbo and down the road, we're looking forward to offering some more programs as well. So that's all kind of, in the works as we move forward.
yeah, and give people an idea what Paulsbo's, how far from Seattle. It's not.
Yeah, Paulsbo's, it's really just a ferry ride across Puget Sound, and you could go over to Bainbridge Island and come up, or you could go up to Edmonds Ferry, which goes over to Kingston on the peninsula side. So either way, it's probably like maybe an hour and a half, trip, something like that. Yeah, so
Yeah, I
not
have a
too
good
far. Easy
I
to
have a
get
good
from.
friend, and she and her husband just went up to Polsbo. I don't know, even though they were just kind of up there in Bainbridge, whatever, just kind of doing a little, just getaway for a couple of days. And she sends me this picture. She was in some shop somewhere, and it was like a box of Viking salt, and
Yeah,
some little,
yeah.
probably horn helmet logo or something on it or whatever. And she's like, lots of Viking stuff up here in Polsbo. And I'm like, yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, they call it Little Norway, right?
Right,
Um,
exactly.
one of the things I was looking at was, like on Wikipedia or something, I was looking at the demographic, and there's like 700,000 people who trace their ancestry back to Scandinavia in Washington State. Of course, most of them are in Seattle region. So that's a lot of people. So I
Yeah.
think this I think, Paulsbo has a real place, and the Viking ship is part of that, it makes it a pretty neat place to come check out for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And for people, maybe if you're going to travel to Seattle, or people even who are in the Seattle area, I mean, they'll know the neighborhood of Ballard, which you mentioned earlier, which is just north of kind of downtown Seattle, but it has the National Nordic Museum, which is beautiful. And so you can go and check that out, but you can also go and, have a beer at Skull. I mean, there's lots of Viking stuff in Ballard and in that area.
For
So
sure.
yeah.
One of the things we're hoping to do next season is to do a Through the Ballard Locks tour with Valkyrie. So people could, get on board and, kind of go through the really cool locks and all that and spend some time in Ballard. So, we hope to bring that forward soon as well.
So how much is it going to cost? What's a ticket cost?
Yeah, it's the pricing is about $35 per person per hour. So depending on, if we're doing like a 2 hour harbor cruise, say on Liberty Bay in Paulsbo, might, maybe about $69, something like that. And then we want to have some other things, like for example, like a Viking sail training. So if people want to come out and really learn how to sail a Viking ship, we want to be able to provide for, going out into the open water and maybe, full day or multi-day excursions for people to learn how to do that. So kind of a number of different opportunities for people to get on board. Also rowing, we can row it. We're going to have the Kitsap Rowing Association here this week to kind of demonstrate how how to move the Viking ship under oars. And so for people want to learn specifically how to do that, we're going to be offering some opportunities to do that as well. So a couple of different ways to kind of get involved with that.
Well, that brings up a good point, actually. So you had to figure out how to build this thing, right? And then you brought in some outside expertise, and then you got it built and everything. But then now you have a ship, and then I mean, presumably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me you might not know how to sail it either. So did you bring outside help in to kind of help
No,
figure out like now we
that's
have this thing?
yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah. Exactly. No, that's a great question. And the truth of it is, yeah, we're very much embryonic in this thing too. This business is hatching, and we are learning how to sail it with all our volunteers. We've been out numerous times, and every time we learn a little bit more. And that it's been kind of our own experimentation and reading and talking with other people and having some people who are experienced sailors and that kind of thing be a part of it. But we've also thought about having some, inviting some people over from Roskilde, say, who have been, doing the sailing for a long time to come over and kind of show us the ropes and what they know about it and that kind of thing. So it's been a collaboration and experimentation, and it's developing, and we grow and learn as we go, you know. So that's really the answer to that. Yeah.
That must be how the Vikings did it, right? I mean, they built those
Yeah.
boats and they're like, all right, what do we do? I mean, can you imagine the
Yeah.
first one that put up an 800 square foot sail?
Yeah.
And then they're
Yeah.
like, now what? I don't,
Well, like for us, we have the square sail and we have it rigged, but there are some additional parts that we haven't rigged on it yet. We're kind of waiting to kind of baby steps first. We'll kind of work with what we have, and then as we get more and more able at it, we can put some of the other components on it, and have a little more nuance to our sailing, that kind of thing. So it's coming along. It's coming along. But we want to do it safely, and we want to do it, we want to do it with a minimum of fuss, so we're just kind of taking it a step at a time.
So with the stress that this thing is able to handle, like sometimes, when you watch these people doing these boat races now, like sailboats or like, what are those, catamarans or whatever, and they can like really just like tip those suckers, without capsizing, but like, what's as far as you can go? Like, is the mast gonna like touch the water kind of thing? Do you know anything about how have you stress test her, I guess is the question.
Well, the first way that we've kind of looked at that is we hired a naval architect and marine engineer to do all the structural analysis and all the calculations, and this was to satisfy the Coast Guard requirements, right? When they look at that, they do a whole review of the plans, like the hull design and all the components of that, even down to like the metallurgy of the rivets. So it's very, very, very thorough examination. But the sail and rigging plan, so all the mast and the shroud needles, which tighten the standing rigging, all the running rigging, all the attachment points, that's all kind of put down on a worksheet, and the engineer goes over all of that and does all the calculations for the different stresses. And then we were able to had to modify in a couple of areas to upgrade, kind of beef those up to make it, provide a safety factor that was acceptable to the Coast Guard. So that's really, the first take on it. And could you repeat for me again what you had asked there?
Well, just sort of like how you would be able to stress test, just sort of how much bend before you break, kind of thing.
So it's experimentation, and we haven't had it out in any really big wind yet. We have three different reefing points, and when we do get some wind, some bigger wind, then we'll start out reefing it and take it out and just experiment and see how it goes. And also with different loads, like if we have 12 passengers on board or 20, and kind of experiment with what that looks like in terms of the weight, because there's kind of a concept of movable ballast. You can move people around on the deck to help get the kind of aspect that you want for the vessel to sail, to kind of optimize that. Also, it's just some of the things that are built in. There's a part right at the water line, one of the strakes, in our case the 8th strake. We have 11 strakes, but at the water line, it's kind of a specialized one called the Megenhofer. And I don't know how to spell that just now, but the Megenhofer, it's almost twice as thick as the other planks, and it's kind of concave on one side and convex. And when you're looking at the ship, head on, the shape of the hull kind of comes up, and then at the Megenhofer, it kind of gull wings out, and then it carries on again to the top like this, yeah. And what that is for is, when the ship's heeled over, under sail, that Megenhofer kind of becomes engaged like a hard chine or almost like a secondary keel. So it provides, a secondary stability to the vessel as you're going, which is important, if you're really heeling over. So, so that was a kind of a late Viking period, innovation, to put this Megenhofer on. So that's not exactly like, Skaldaleb 6. Perhaps, but there were a couple of things that we modified to make it what it is,
Yeah.
Wait, so
there's actually, I was just gonna say quickly, like there's actually a pretty iconic photo of I think it's the Gokstad ship, the one that's in the Oslo Museum, of what you say, like it's a straight on shot of it, and you can really get a good sense of how it does just exactly what you just described.
Yeah, because very much, the underwater part of it is, of course, hugely important to the overall performance of the vessel. So I mean, if you had like just a dugout, rounded shape, it's going to be very tippy, and all the different factors that are part of it, the ballast. The Vikings had tons and tons of stones in there for ballast, and the Coast Guard, they weren't really so much about the stones. That was something that we could use. So we had to kind of make some adaptations, but it'll be interesting to see just how it does perform, under various conditions. So we'll be documenting it, taking some notes, as we go, so we can kind of be able to adapt to whatever conditions that in terms of our preparation for it. So yeah.
Should be fun. I believe it was the Skolev 5, the Sea Stallion. I
think
don't
that
always get them right.
Yeah, I don't
And I think
either.
and I remember reading that they pushed it to 17 knots in ideal conditions. So
That's
um
pretty, yeah, that's pretty
that's really
amazing.
fast. I told my French
Yeah,
grandfather that one time, and he was just like, "You're full of it. Like, go
yeah.
away."
I know
There's no
because
way.
with Valkyrie, the hull speed is supposed to be like nine and change or something uh knots, but from our research, we know that similar vessels would do, in perfect conditions would be like 12 knots or maybe even 14 knots, which is really kind of amazing.
Yeah,
Just
Yeah.
because I've read about 8 as kind of a good number
yeah,
for that period of time. I mean,
yeah,
and they could get from in those good conditions at that speed, they could get from say Norway to Iceland in, less than a week.
right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Well, this is the modern reconstruction that they pushed to that level. I don't think the Vikings were out there going, "How fast can we get?" They couldn't
yeah,
measure it, right?
yeah,
So they, but there was another one that was done where they took a ship and they sailed it from Roskilde to I forget where. It wasn't that far, and so if you like do the average, and this was actually helpful for my
yeah,
books because I'm always trying to figure out how long would it take them to get there, right?
yeah.
And so they mapped out how long, how far it was, and if I'd gone off of like the average of like let's say they're averaging 6 knots, they would have gotten there in like 6 hours, but it took
Mm,
them 38 because the
yeah,
wind kept changing and the conditions
yeah.
kept changing. So they ended up crawling at like 1.5 knots, and it
Oh
was
yeah,
just kind of progress and you get pushed back and progress. And I thought that to me, that was the most interesting one because it was like a real world example of these are great ships, but the weather is still the weather.
yeah. That's right. In the currents,
Yeah.
in Puget Sound, the currents can be really strong in places, and it's all about timing it so have a favorable condition. So yeah, you can be going 1 knot or even backwards in some situations.
Yeah, I mean the Pacific is a whole different beast from the Baltic or even the Atlantic. Just in the currents, right? You
Mhm.
could you could
Yeah,
easily find yourself in a difficult situation in the Pacific.
yeah, for sure.
yeah, well, and I was thinking that earlier too, despite the lovely images that we have where it looks like it's this beautiful sunny day and blue sky in the greater Seattle area, for people who are from this area know that it's not always the case. And so are you mostly looking at this as kind of a summertime gig, or are people going to be going out in like November or February and trying to brave it in real Viking style?
I
Not
would.
not this year. Would you? All right. Not this year. No, we're gonna haul it out in towards the end of October this year. I'll go back up to Anacortes, kind of its winter home, and I actually go back to the East Coast for the winter. I have another thing that I do out there, and so it's nice to have the peace of mind that the boat's out of the water and kind of put to bed for the winter.
Oh,
And then we'll have it back on the water, in the spring, sometime in March or early April. So yeah,
what's the sail made of?
it's like a Dacron. It's a synthetic, and it's interesting that you mentioned about that. Sean, who made that, is an incredible sail loft over there in Port Hadlock, and the sail was actually made right at the kind of around the time that the keel was laid for Valkyrie. So it's been tucked up in the rafters of his sail loft for like all these years now. And then we finally kind of pulled it down recently, when we were rigging Valkyrie up for the first time. So it was kind of cool. I hadn't actually seen it all unfurled until just like 2 years ago, even though it's been there for a long time.
What are the dimensions?
Um, I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. It's probably, well, I think it's about the square footage is like 528, something like that, square feet. So it's probably like, I don't know, about I'm just kind of trying to figure it out in my head right at the moment. I should know this. Probably about like 16 feet tall by about, the similar, width, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
think we have, what is it, one of the sagas or something, if memory serves. Anyway, that where they're talking about the fact that the sail was even more important than the ship in some
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah, I've heard this as well. In terms of the craftsmanship and the time invested in creating something like that, this was something that, as I understand it, it was a task of the women in the Viking period to, they have their looms, and it would be, say it was this wide, they'd be, making a kind of a panel of wool,
Yeah.
really tightly woven, and then those panels were stitched together, very intricately, and had to be very strong, of course. And and however it was preserved with lanolin or whatever they had used to kind of make the sail material, it was like it was super precious, and it
Yeah.
was it would take a very long time to make these things. So yeah, very 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 important part of the whole thing for sure.
Yeah, they've done some experimental archaeology on that for sure. I mean, they've done a lot of that at like Roskilde with regard to the boats and stuff. But I know there's a ship in Denmark in Kerteminde called the Ladby ship, which
Mhm.
I visited when my husband and I were there a couple of years ago. And it's probably a similar size. It's actually probably a little bit longer than Valkyrie, but the sail, I think it's like maybe in feet, like 32 by 20. So, and I think categorize it kind of as a medium-sized warship, with a
Yeah.
sail. And so they've done some calculations on that as far as, the number of hours and stuff. And it was something like, I think 4,100 man hours or woman hours, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
to do this, like for what one person. So it would take, the better part of like a year or three-quarters of a year or something like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
create one sail.
Yeah.
So it's crazy to think about and making these kinds of things and the ships as well in this kind of pre-industrial time where you don't have mass production really, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'd also heard that that the sails, when it was taken out for the winter, they would be put up in the church, at some period. Maybe this was like post Viking, but they were so valuable. I had to take care of them. But and the place where they would be put was hung up in the rafters of the church, which is
Huh.
kind of cool. Think of like a like a stave church or something, with that many, you know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
After
Yeah.
Christianity, they're like
Yeah.
hanging
Yeah.
get that
Well,
pagan stuff out of here,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
I don't.
you can imagine they put it up maybe in their great halls and so forth.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned about the peace of mind that you get when you're on the East Coast and the boat's
Yeah.
out of the water.
Yeah.
And just in terms of, because I'm a writer and I like to get in people's heads and for purposes. And this idea of the attachment that you have to the ship now that you've been through this entire process.
Yeah.
Could you speak to just where, it's where does this ship live in your mental and spiritual,
Yeah.
existence, as far as, and what kind of, I don't want to put you in a strange and plausible situation, but it's imagining like a shipwreck, right? Like this isn't just a boat you bought to go fishing and then you run it
Right.
on the rocks, right? Like, could you bring us a little bit into your world, into the kind of the emotions
Sure.
and
Sure.
feelings?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll saying it like, how is it just you do love it just more than your children or just less than your children?
I didn't want to ask the question that way, Terry.
Actually,
I'll do
one of
it.
one of my children's out here right now in Paulsbo, helping out with it as a new crew member for a month. So that's kind of cool. Um, yeah. So I mean, it's an excellent question, and how would I approach that? I'm thinking, on the one hand, it's it's been such a long and a journey and investment of time and money and energy and all my thinking and research and all that stuff. It's been kind of all consuming and sacrificing. There's a lot of opportunities that I've had to pass up for putting into this Viking ship dream. And it's also been the idea of like identity, kind of having an identity wrapped up in it as well, but also, realizing that, I think the biggest thing I realized at some point along the way is that it's all about much more than me, and, just look at the heart and, and care that a lot of the volunteers have put into this, and really everybody who's had a hand in it has been just kind of drawn to it powerfully, and intangibly and beautifully. And sometimes it's really hard to really put into words what the connection is for any given person. But for me, it's really mostly about an idea of community, and also part of that, a thread in there too, is really a connection to the ancestors. There were many different times along the way. Jay Smith and I'd be sitting there, or some others, and we'd take a little pause in the afternoon to just stand back and kind of marvel at it, and you get a sense of sometimes, the ancestors were kind of like reaching back through time almost to kind of want to show you something, a little inkling of something, or you might get a little feeling about something. It's hard to put into words, but you definitely had kind of a sense of that kind of presence sometimes. So, but the other part is, it's for me, it's, personally, it's a profession too. So this is my second act, is to be, a Viking merchant, and have, take people out on amazing trips on a really cool vessel, and try to, share with people and learn with them about, aspects of Viking culture and what that means, how that might be relevant nowadays. We know that they were very much a warrior society, but they were, of course, so much more than that, so be able to express some of those thoughts as well. And really, at the heart of it is to be able to just engender a sense of community. This is something that, all are welcome to, and we want to be kind of a there's the ship Valkyrie, but really it's just kind of a medium, a vessel for doing the work of community building, and bringing people together. And that's that's really the heart of it for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you going to have a second?
Huh?
Are you going to have a second one?
Yeah. I mean, what's better than a Viking ship, is two Viking ships, So,
Well,
hey, anything's possible, anything could happen. But yeah.
so I want to know, I guess maybe even last question. I'm not sure like how much time you have, but why is she named Valkyrie and who named her?
Yeah, this is bit of a mystery for me, because I came to the project, a little bit later on, and I mean, I'd have to probably go back and ask my father about this, and I don't really because it was named early on, and I think really that Valkyrie is, as we know, it's the chooser of the slain, right? It's Odin's kind of helpers, and very kind of supernatural figures. But I think also, the female and the feminine, is a really big part of that, of course. And I think that's a really important thing, for the ship. And so there's, I personally, I kind of imagine it as like Valkyrie is like, it's again, it's kind of this, like, it's this, the ship is this container or this vessel that, it's, and the Valkyrie were like selecting kind of the bravest and choosing the bravest to be in Valhalla. And this is like, kind of getting their hands, it's an opportunity for the ship to get its hands around, around a bunch of people,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm struggling a little bit to convey what this is, but it's kind of like a, the Valkyrie kind of like an archetypal kind of figure, I guess is the best way to put it. There's something in the collective that that it speaks to, and it has to do with, about bravery and, about what a Viking was, an explorer and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Fun.
so is the website the best way for people to get in touch with you just for more information and if they want to go out on her and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So the website, is northwestvikingship.com.
Yeah.
And you can go on there. There's a lot of background about the construction and about the community and about the type of programs that we're going to be offering. So yeah, that's really the best place to go to learn more about it.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll link to that in the show notes so people can find it easily. But wow. This has been like so amazing. I'm so glad this finally happened. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.